Hi, Toni.
Hi, Joan.
How are you?
Pretty well, thank you.
Good. Well, we're here in your apartment at Springwater on a very, very beautiful late summer, early autumn day with the sun shining. And we're going to talk, right?
Yes.
Well, there's a camera pointing at us.
Video camera.
Yes. Recently, I came into your apartment here and you had been looking through old photographs from your life that you hadn't looked at in a very long time, you said. And perhaps even in preparation for this video, you were doing it.
Yes, it was in preparation for Paula. She had asked for a few pictures to get together, so I got the old boxes out and started rummaging.
Uh-huh.
And it was quite an interesting experience.
It was?
Yes.
What was it like?
First of all, I just couldn't, I almost couldn't stop. I had to get this whole thing together and sort of worked quite steadily at it. I didn't think of eating time or anything, just trying to sort out, because we have quite a number of boxes of pictures. and after having the little booklet together with a series of pictures, I realized that there were a lot of happy moments in my life, that I'd sort of forgotten how hard my parents must have worked to make life really nice and happy and eventful for us children.
Uh-huh.
And there was a sort of real feeling of gratitude to my parents after putting these pictures together.
So it's like kind of a chance to re-look at your life from a new perspective?
Yes. And at the same time realizing that these pictures left out a lot of stuff which happened, and so this picture book is not a complete story. But when we do take pictures, we usually take them of happy times and nice occasions, and because that's what we want to remember.
Uh-huh. We have a third party, a fourth party here. Well, I know I was struck by the energy and the exuberance you had about the pictures, and I know it was, when I looked at them, it meant a lot to me to see them. There was something really neat about seeing your life, other parts of your life.
Yes, and in looking at the pictures, I realized how much of my life was lived in pictures, because my father was an avid photographer. When I was 8 days old, the first movie of me was taken. These still pictures are the smaller part of what pictures were taken of us children. It was mostly movies, and practically everything was documented. So my memory now of my life is really what I also remember that the movies were shown, because they were shown quite often. So it's interesting that you're not quite sure. Do you remember this event because you remember the movie that was taken, or is there a memory of the event itself, which is also a movie in a way, because the real thing is gone. So, what I started to say is picture taking was very important to me, to see myself in pictures. And when my father would bring these cards home, he was in the film factory. He was the research director of ACFA, which is a German film corporation. He would have his case bulging with the pictures. And I wanted to see them right away, and he would say, wait. And the more eager I was to see these pictures, the more he would keep me waiting for them, which was quite torturous. But that's the way he was. He felt one should have a reserve about oneself.
Maybe that's what we're doing right now to the people who are viewing this video who are waiting to see the pictures. We're making them wait.
Yeah.
So here we are looking at your baby picture from when you were born. How old were you there, Toni?
I would have to look at the back of the picture to see, but it was probably just a few days old.
And that's with your mother and father?
Yes. My father set the camera, he told me later, and then he quickly ran there to have the whole family in there. Because I already had a sister and a brother. I was the third one.
What year was it when you were born?
1927. In July.
And here you are again.
Yes, that is still in Berlin. I was born in Berlin, and my father's mother was living with us at the time. Probably just after my mother came home from the hospital.
So that's your mother and your grandmother.
Yes.
How old are you here, Toni?
About 16 months. This was one of the few pictures that obviously were taken at the photographer's. It's interesting that I had this boy haircut, and I always suspected that my mother would have liked to have a boy as her second child. And she told me quite frequently that people would think that I was a boy, and that sometimes in protest I would say, I am not a boy, I am a girl.
Which one are you, Toni?
I'm the one pulling my uncle's nose, sitting on the deck chair there. This picture was taken on our balcony, in which a lot of our outdoor life took place, unless we took walks in the nearby park.
In Berlin?
No, this is in Leipzig. Before I was a year old, our family did move to Leipzig.
And is this your father's brother? Or
No, this is my mother's brother, and also the father of Peter, whom I always called my brother. His wife had died in childbirth. Actually, his wife's name was Toni. And my parents took the baby into our family.
Is Peter in this picture?
Peter is the one sitting in front with his mouth wide open,
and so
laughing.
And why was he taken into your family?
Because his mother died in childbirth, and my uncle felt, and my parents wanted to give a home to this motherless baby, and I don't know. Of course, my uncle eventually emigrated, being Jewish. But he came to visit us every weekend with his car.
How old are you here, Toni?
4 years old in this picture, which is the steps leading out of our dining room to the balcony. And if it was a sunny day and warm, I was usually very happy, particularly the few months of the year that we didn't have to wear long woolen stockings or knee socks. To be allowed to be without socks was enough reason to be exuberant.
Is that you on the right, Toni?
Yes, this is at a birthday party for my sister's birthday.
Is that your sister on the left?
No, it is one of her friends. You can see to the right is sort of a half moon. These were the very bright lights that my mother would hold while my father was taking the pictures. These birthday parties were always a huge event in my life, anticipated with a lot of longing.
Here you are on what looks like a family outing. What year was this?
This was Easter 1935.
1935. What year did the war start, Toni?
39.
Was Hitler already around? And
Oh yes.
Were you
yes.
conscious of?
Oh yes, very much so. He came to power 1933, and my parents were very anxious lest we say anything that we heard spoken in the house. I remember one time
Your mother
writing into a little diary some bad things about this man Hitler. I don't know why I would have how I would have heard this, but I had probably overheard their conversation, and my father found this little diary, and he was very stern and told me never ever to put anything down in writing of what I heard say at home or how I felt, because this could be very, very dangerous if somebody found that.
Your mother was half Jewish. Your mother was Jewish.
My father was Gentile, so we were called mixtures. Mixed ones was sort of the term given to half-Jewish children.
And which one are you in this picture?
I'm the one riding the bike. My sister has the baby buggy. My mother is way over to the left with a large hat. And
is that your brother Peter?
My brother Peter is in the back riding a stroller.
The one that your family took in?
Yes. And this is his maternal aunt, the sister of his mother, who died while he was born. These outings, these Sunday morning outings, were very typical. We would go either to the zoo or into this park, or to the zoo through the park every Sunday morning. And sometimes we children were quite bored with this. We weren't allowed to, of course, run through the meadows or into the woods. We had to stay on the path.
You would have liked to be running through the meadow or the woods.
Yes. Or pick flowers, particularly in spring when the little snowdrops came. I would have loved to pick them, but I was told that if I picked them and the policeman saw me, he would take me on his horse to the police station and arrest me.
So there was a lot of consciousness of possible danger, and
yes.
And were you very much aware at this time in your life that you were of a Jewish or half-Jewish family, or that?
In 35, I probably was, yes, because I was in school.
You were how old in this picture?
Well, it's 35. I was born 27, so I was almost 8 years old.
Uh-huh. And is this you on the right, Toni?
Yes, with my grandmother, my Oma, as we call it in German, my mother's mother, whom I loved very dearly. She was a very loving, gentle person, and I always felt that my mother was not very nice to her. My mother was very abrupt and curt, or particularly if she was talking about her other sons, or would maybe sometimes say something that had something to do with Jewishness. My mother was very careful and anxious that my grandmother not talk to us about her brothers or anything about her background. And my grandmother was almost afraid of my mother. She was very obedient to not offend my mother.
What happened to her during the war?
Her husband died, and then she was alone in Berlin in an apartment with one of her sons who was retarded, and she died in 36. She must have felt very lonesome there. She always loved to come to visit us. She was very fond of my father, and my father was very, very gentle and respectful of her. So there was a wonderful relationship between my dad and the Oma. This is a picture taken at Christmas time, and Christmas time was an especially wonderful time at our house because relatives came from many places, and there was always a very gentle and forgiving mood, and nobody scolded my brother at those times.
At other times, your brother was...
My brother was scolded a lot, yes.
And that was painful for you?
Very painful, yes.
Were you curious about your Jewish history, or was that something that you particularly were interested in learning from this grandmother?
No. There wasn't that much other. I put this together sort of in retrospect, because she didn't say much. It was more that when she was going to talk about her other sons who had already emigrated, my mother was very sharp to try to cut short this kind of conversation. I knew nothing about Judaism. My mother was not religious, and all her brothers, except the retarded one, also married Gentile partners, spouses, which I never knew how my grandmother would have felt about that, but she never gave much evidence of Jewishness, but I sensed that there was something she would have liked to talk about, which was not possible in our home.
Who's this?
This is my mother looking down at me, and
your mother on the right.
On the right, and to the left of her is her best friend. They both went to university together and got their PhDs together. And then Ilse, Tante Ilse, married Uncle Paul. And when we were baptized in 1933 in our home, they became our godparents. That's the Lutheran tradition, probably Protestant tradition. And later on, this may have been one of the last visits to our house of Aunt Elsa and Uncle Paul, because Uncle Paul was in the SA, a Nazi movement, and he felt it was inappropriate for them to visit us any further, to keep up the relationship, since my mother was Jewish. It was a really hard blow to our family.
Were you close to...
Well, it was an interesting thing. I wanted to go to school earlier than school permitted in Saxony, where we lived. So our godparents lived in Prussia, where I could have entered school at the age of 5. So being, I was told, very eager to go to school, I was sent to their home for a few months to start school there, and then having been in school, I was accepted in Saxony, even though I was younger. But living with them was not easy for me. Actually, I liked Paul a little bit better than Elsa.
And then he joined the SA?
Yes, the SA.
The SA
SA was the brown shirts, which was a rivalry between the SS. The SS won over the brown shirts. It was this whole putsch affair, Rome. I don't have the history too clear. But it was, in the beginning, the leading Nazi movement, people in the brown shirts with a red swastika sign.
How was that for you, to know that these people had become identified with the Nazi movement?
Well, that was sort of, in a way, a given that they had done this, but that they wouldn't come to our house anymore was a tremendous blow. Particularly, I felt it because it was such a blow to my mother. I had not liked my godmother too well, because she was very strict with her children, very harsh, which hurt me while I was living at their house. So I often went into the basement where the custodians of the house lived, in a very modest apartment, and I loved it there. There was warmth there, and I remember eating broth with egg noodles.
You mean heart warmth there?
Heart warmth,
yeah.
Yes.
And you say your mother was a PhD. What was she a PhD in?
Chemistry. And Elsa was in English, in the English language.
Was your mother employed as a chemist? Or?
While she was doing laboratory work in a laboratory of actually a very famous chemist who won the Nobel Prize. Both my parents were assistants to the winners of the Nobel Prize.
Your father was a chemist also?
My father was a physical chemist, and my mother was an organic chemist.
When you said it was a given that they had joined the brown shirts, what did you mean by that? Was this just something everyone was doing?
So many people were in the party, and we had a lot of friends who were not brown shirts, but who were members of the Nazi party who stuck with us. They just had to join for expediency of keeping their jobs. I think I'm correct in saying that it shocked me more because my mother was so hurt over losing her friend. After the war, Elsa wrote to my mother in Switzerland after we moved to Switzerland and wanted to make up. Her husband had died, and my mother thought about it quite a bit, but then she did forgive her, and they got together again, and their children visited my parents, and they were very fond of the fact that the children had remembered them.
Who's this?
This is my brother Peter. I always say my brother because this is how I felt about him. Actually, he was my cousin.
You were very close to him?
I felt very close with him, and we usually played together trains and whatever boys play. This, I don't know how well you can see on this picture, was a very elaborate train system that my father and mother and my uncle Peter's father would set up about 6 weeks before Christmas. Our children's playroom was closed to us, and the three of them would, on a table, build up this very elaborate system of trains on the ground and an elevated train. And you see Peter there at a high structure, which is an elevator, which you could crank up and put little cars into the elevator and then take them out on top and run them down an autobahn, crossing all the trains just by gravity. These little cars would roll. And my parents were always saying that doing this helped them to keep their sanity in the midst of all the worries and troubles to build this. And the two sides of our room were covered with paper where my father made marvelous landscapes of the Swiss Alps to form the backdrop, and little mountains on which castles out of folding paper were placed, were all made by them using boxes and then draping linen over it with glue on it and then painting it. So these were little mountains. And of course we had lots of guests who would come there, and lots of pictures were taken around the train.
And what are you doing here, Toni?
This is gymnastics practice. My sister and I belonged to a gymnastics and dance group.
How old are you?
I'm almost 9, 8.5.
Is that you on the right?
It's me on the right.
And your sister on the left?
And Anne on the left. And we would go there once or twice a week in the evening or afternoon, and then practice at home. We both liked that very much.
And so it was both gymnastics and dance? This
Yes.
was when you were into dance?
Yes, that's right. Of course, our word gymnastics in German is a little bit different. It isn't this acrobatic stuff that the word refers to in this country. It is a little bit like yoga, exercises. But since it was held or conducted by a dance teacher, it was to limber up for learning expressive dance.
You said that dance was really important to you.
Very important, yes.
Was that
yes.
at this time that you kind of envisioned yourself becoming a professional dancer, and that you really, or was that later?
I don't remember whether it was already at that time, but I loved it to use the body and to do all kinds of things and jumps and go to those lessons.
Is your sister Anne still alive?
Yes, she is. And this was one thing, and since you bring it up, that's one thing she wasn't as good in as I was. Everything else in school, she totally excelled in writing, in marks, in looks. I felt always she was much more beautiful than I was, and because she was 2.5 years older, she had much more interesting friends who were older. But in gymnastics and skiing and dancing,
in physical things,
I felt I excelled.
Uh-huh.
What is a bit better than her.
What does your sister do now?
She's a psychoanalyst and is sort of retiring from her practice because she has 5 grandchildren, and she is doing more and more babysitting for them, and whenever one of her patients finishes the analysis, she doesn't take a new one, so that she is phasing it out to be more with her grandchildren.
Huh. Who's this?
This is the family. Of course, my father is never on there because he's taking the pictures. My mother, and on her right, that's me, on her left is Anne, and Peter is on the side, which often sort of happened. Anne and I were definitely the center of the family, and Peter was sort of a little bit of an appendix. Now, my parents would be very, very unhappy to hear me say that, but this is how I felt. This is the street on which we lived. These are apartment houses to the left.
Looks like you're wearing uniforms, are you?
No, these are very precious gabardine coats.
Ah!
It was the custom then often to dress children alike. Like in this country you dress twins alike, but my mother was very, very fond of clothes and had a very fine clothing store that she took us to, and the ladies there knew her when she came in, and they always had something that would please her, and these are these gabardine coats which are rainproof. Huh?
How did you feel about them? Did you like dressing up?
I like to get new clothes, yes.
Ah, you did?
Yes. Some of the clothes I didn't like, but I liked it when it was very fashionable.
Uh-huh. Oh, that's a great picture. How old are you there?
9 years. I think I was 9 on that picture.
Mm-hmm.
This was a very, very important phase in the life of us children, to impersonate Indians. There is a German author who never came to this country, but studied Indian lore very carefully and wrote about 32 books about the noble Indians.
So you actually had a positive picture of the Indians?
Oh, very, very positive.
They were not the savages.
No. Although the Kiowas were, and the Apaches, but then there were others who, I knew all those names. And the Apaches were the good ones. The Kiowas were the bloodthirsty ones. And of course we were Apaches. And loved to impersonate these plays and these stories.
You'd make up stories and
from
the book.
From the book, yes, and
act them out.
And we were both, particularly my sister and I, read them with incredible passion because they were written in that way. Also, there was a lot of nobility, of forgiveness by Winnetou, who was one of the Apache chiefs, to say that when he goes to meet Manitou, the Great Spirit, he will ask for forgiveness for the white people for what they have done. And this was very moving to us, the nobility of these Indians who were so... their land was taken away. This was all described very well. And you see again my parents providing us with the costumes to do these things. This is another picture on the balcony. I love this little picture. It is Peter, Anne, and myself smoking the peace pipe. You can see the seriousness with which we do this.
Who's this?
On my left is our cousin Peggy from England. My father had an uncle who settled in England and had 7 children, and 2 of the daughters for 3 consecutive summers came to Leipzig to live with us for 2 or 3 months. We children had already been taught quite a bit of English by my mother, who read English fairy tales to us. I remember Peter Rabbit, knowing it by heart, and The Wizard of Oz was read to us, and of course simpler rhymes and things, so that when Peggy came, and Joan the year before, Joan is not...
But she was another one.
She was older, and I didn't take to Joan as I did to Peggy. Peggy and I were very, very close. We learned and picked up English very quickly because we spent so much time together. She was a prize-winning swimmer and did beautiful diving and was a real role model for us. Of course, she was 16 or 17 years old then. And,
in this picture, she's 16 or 17.
Yes,
and how old are you there?
8 or 9.
Uh-huh. What's going on here?
This is my sister's birthday party.
Are you in this picture?
No, I'm not. But on the left is what I consider my best friend at the time. We were always allowed to invite a few friends when one of the siblings had a birthday party. And on the right is a friend of my sister's.
What year is this?
This is 1938. Uh-huh. So I was 9 years old, not quite.
Uh-huh.
I chose this picture because it shows Frau Heil and Lisbeth. Frau Heil was a cleaning lady who came once a week, but whenever we had parties, she would come and help out. And Lisbeth was our cook. She came into our family when I was not quite a year old. We had just moved to Leipzig, and she tells me that she heard the new baby crying on the balcony. My mother had felt like mothers did at that time, that it was good for babies to cry. It strengthens their lungs and makes them healthy. And Lisbeth, who had taken the job as a cook under the condition that she have nothing to do with children, and she was told, you don't have to worry, there is a maid to take care of the children.
You mean she didn't want to have any?
She didn't want to have any, she just wanted to cook,
uh-huh.
and she didn't like children.
Okay.
But she took such pity on this little crying baby that she would go to the balcony and pick me up, and a very strong bond developed between us. I spent untold hours in the kitchen reading to her and spending time while she was ironing and washing and cooking.
Did they stay with you through the war?
Yes, Lisbeth stayed with us through the war. Only when we were moved by the Americans out of Leipzig did she stay behind, because she had still some relatives. But Lisbeth was a shining example of a person who not only didn't care that my mother was Jewish, but she felt it was such an outrage that was taking place, and she was not going to be taken in by any kind of propaganda. She had her heart and mind in the right place.
Were you worried about what would happen to people like that who stuck with you or who didn't support that?
I wasn't worried because it happened all the time. There were a lot of people who did stick with us. Of course, we were not a fully Jewish family, and my father, being Gentile, having a very prestigious position of being a professor and writer of a textbook, and he had a industrial position. So we were not as badly off and wouldn't have been as much discriminated against. As a matter of fact, my mother was protected on account of my father's position, so she did not have to go to concentration camp. My father's immediate boss, who was one of the IG Farben directors, went to Berlin to talk to the Gestapo to ask for exemption for my father's wife, for my mother. And I don't know whether you've ever heard the expression by Hitler or Goebbels or some of these people, I determine who is Jewish. So my mother was spared to be sent to Theresienstadt.
Did you ever have fear that could be reversed?
Oh yes, and actually when after the Americans conquered the city of Leipzig, someone came to our house, and when they found out that my mother and father were still alive, they were just embracing all of us and said they had seen that my father and mother were on a death list. Mm. So had the Americans come a couple of weeks later, my mother and father may not have survived, because that was one of the things that happened, and happens so often when the ship sinks. The commander wants to take as many with him as he can, and this is why a lot of people were executed at the very end.
Who's this?
This is my brother Peter, my cousin Peter, and I. I like the picture. It's not a very good picture as far as resolution is concerned, but it was a very happy time. We were both in Hamburg. Hamburg was the city where his mother had lived before she got married to his father, and there were all kinds of relatives there, brothers and sisters of his deceased mother, who once a year would invite Peter to come up to Hamburg, and this is where he was always very much loved and spoiled, as my father and mother felt that he was spoiled there. And one year I was invited too, and you can see how happy he looks there. And
how old are the two of you in this picture?
It's in 1939.
Roughly?
It's the year the war broke out. So I was 12 and Peter was 13 and a half.
Uh-huh. Is Peter still alive?
No, Peter is not alive anymore. He took his life in the 70s. I forget when it was.
When he was how old?
In his 50s.
Was that a big blow to you?
Yes, it was. And to Kyle, too. Kyle was very fond of Peter. And to our son, Ralph. Ralph and Peter had gotten along very well, because Ralph was an adopted child, and Peter, I felt, had more feeling and affinity for Ralph than for his younger son. But the Hamburg days were always happy days, and it's interesting because now I do go to Hamburg to hold a retreat there.
The German retreat.
And Ina, this very close friend of mine who died, also was in Hamburg, so there's an interesting center. Doris was born in Hamburg.
Were you aware at this time of that the war had started?
Oh,
and this was
oh
your
yes,
consciousness very
oh
much
yes,
at this time?
the war. I remember still hearing my parents talk to a good friend of theirs, who a Jewish man who would come over and chat with them. That I heard him say, "The guns are going to go off," and it was a very scary, horrendous thought to me that there would be war. Also, you asked earlier whether I was aware of being Jewish. By this time, we of course were very much aware, because we had to be. Every German had to be certified as to the ingredients of his race, and whether you were, what percentage of you, if any, was Jewish, and this was according to the Nuremberg laws, and we had to have pictures taken and receive this certificate that we were these mixtures, half Jewish and half Aryan.
Were you aware that people were going to concentration camps?
Oh yes. My parents, particularly my mother and Lisbeth, would listen to the foreign radio, and they did this in a relatively clumsy way. They would not allow us to be in the room, so we knew something was going on, and of course we listened at the wall and would hear things broadcast by the English radio. My mother listened to the British broadcasting.
And were there bombing raids at this time going on, or when did that start?
It didn't start in 1939, no. In 1939, and already earlier, Germany just invaded all these countries, and there was just victory after victory after victory, and a tremendous high among the German people. The raids came later. Our city was not bombed until 1943.
And what was that like when Leipzig was being...
When Leipzig
was being bombed?
It was indescribable. Maybe something like what you experience when you have an earthquake, but it doesn't stop. And of course, the way Leipzig was bombed, the planes had flown to Berlin, which was bombed so regularly that the Leipzig anti-aircraft and fire engines were all sent to Berlin, which was about a half an hour's distance. And the planes did not drop the load on Berlin, but on Leipzig, which was unprotected, and the city burned for a whole week. Not immediately, but the bombs were placed in such a clever way that a storm developed, and the fire carried from one house to another.
Was it bombed nightly then, or weekly, or?
No, we were never bombed like the Western industrial sections, or Hamburg, or Berlin. I would say maybe we had a dozen air raids or so.
What were those like? What would happen?
The worst one was if there were detonation bombs, fire bombs. You wouldn't feel the whole earth shake, but to have how do you call it, a bomb which has an explosive bomb dropped would just rock the whole basement. And then one time when a bomb hit very closely, the basement would fill with dust, and all you saw was huddled, scared people. My father being one among them, which was a tremendous shock to me to see my father huddled up and afraid.
Is this around the same time?
Probably. I don't have a date on this picture, but it is obviously not a picture taken by my father on a happy occasion. It was probably taken by a photographer for some kind of identification. The interesting thing, which I remember very clearly, was that I was trying to approximate my clothing to that of my friends who were in the Hitler Youth movement. All of the friends I had in school were in that movement. There was no other that I was aware of half-Jewish girl around, except my sister, of course. And I felt very left out, particularly since they did what seemed to me fascinating things like camping, hiking.
So it was sort of like the Girl Scouts.
That's right. This is how I saw it. I never knew that they were being prepared for horrible things. And to feel that I was like them, I chose this sweater and shirt, and even probably to have this little medallion there to approximate the leather knot where the black tie was fit through. Maybe. I did long very much to not stick out, but to wear a uniform.
Who's this?
On the right is my sister, and I'm on the left. This was her confirmation. I don't remember the year.
This is you on the right, Toni?
Yes, this is 3 years after my sister's confirmation.
How old are you?
I'm 15, and this was a very important day for me.
This is your confirmation?
My confirmation in the Lutheran Church. It was sort of the culmination of my very strong religious feelings during a few years around that time.
So were you raised on a religious?
No, we were baptized in 1933 in order to make us more like the rest of the people and not Jewish. But neither my father nor mother were religious in any sense.
So this is something you took up on your own?
Yes, and if you were baptized in a Lutheran church, it was the custom then to be confirmed in the church. And for 1 year before you were confirmed, you took religious catechism studies at the church. And I was very passionately interested and very fervently believing in God and Christ at the time.
Whoa, what's this?
This was also a very important part of my younger life.
This is you?
This is me, yes.
How old are you?
I am 14 years old, and this was the first play that we danced, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This picture my father took at home. He invited the crew, not the crew, how do you say, the cast, to our home to take some pictures there. And some pictures that you'll see later were taken on stage. I chose this part. I felt I could express much more in being this queen than Snow White.
Okay. So this is you as the evil queen in another one of her disguises?
Yes, this is as an old witch is trying to sell or give the poisoned apple to Snow White to do away with a rival in beauty. This was the dance of the queen after Snow White died, this expression of triumph over being the most beautiful again.
How long were you interested in theater and dance?
Oh, time questions are very hard for me to answer. It was quite a number of years, and there was a tremendously sentimental, romantic, longing sort of attachment to this kind of life of expressing my feelings with dance and music on a stage with an audience.
Well, how did you get out of it? What happened? Where did it go?
Probably our move from the more and more bombing raids, more and more destruction of buildings, but also our move from Leipzig out of from Leipzig, which became a Russian zone, into the American zone, which happened in 1945.
And then did you go to Switzerland at that time? Or?
Not right away, no. We stayed in Munich for a year and a half and then moved to Switzerland from there.
And how old were you when you moved to Switzerland?
That was in 1946, so I was 19 years old.
Uh-huh.
This picture here near the waterfall was the pose of my life. I really was in love with this picture and sent it to whoever wanted or didn't want it.
How old were you?
15.
So this is still in Germany?
They're still in Germany, yes.
Oh my, how old are you here, Toni?
I'm about 20 years old. We were now living in Switzerland, where we lived in Zurich, and I hadn't been allowed to finish high school, being half Jewish. And my sister had just finished high school when this edict came out, so she could enter medical school in Switzerland, but not having finished school, I worked, and our family needed the income, so I got a position as a secretary with a corresponding in English, and had enough money to have my clothes tailored, which was a very wonderful thing for me.
Oh, there's Kyle.
Yes, we met in Switzerland. The interesting thing is that Kyle arrived as an exchange student from America within a few days that I had arrived from Germany. Of course, we didn't know each other then, and we had both crossed the same border. We met in a restaurant in Zurich, and I was dining with a friend of my sister's who was a medical student from America, who was a close friend of Kyle's. He introduced us, and it was at first sight that I knew I was going to marry this man.
Really?
Yes.
Huh?
Yes. Truly love at first sight.
And here you are skiing in the Alps, you and Kyle. Was this before you were married, or at?
Yes. This was before we were married.
This is you on the left, Toni, with the cigarette?
Yes. Yes, and my sister on the right also holding a cigarette.
And what year is this?
This is 1949,
49?
yes.
The year after I was born. This is you and Kyle getting married?
Yes, it's our wedding day. 1950 in Zurich, Switzerland.
And this is still your wedding here?
Yes, that is the banquet.
That's you and Kyle there on the right?
Yes, and my father giving a speech. My parents had invited a lot of their friends for this wedding. A lot of dignitaries of some scientific stature, and my father here was addressing all these people and how he met them and what they meant to him. And at one point he said, at the time when your mother and I got married, I had a position and I knew what I was doing, and here my son-in-law doesn't even know what he's going to do when he goes back home. But this is the way young people are these days. This is a picture of my father 25 years later on his 80th birthday, giving another speech. He loved to talk and to teach, and he was very good at it.
This must be you on the right and Ralph on the left.
Yes, this is our newly adopted baby Ralph when he was a few days old, probably a week.
In what year was this?
This was December 1958.
And where are you living now in this picture?
In Niagara Falls. Kyle was a school principal there.
What was Kyle doing before that? Was he
He had trained in chemical engineering, and this is precisely what he was about to give up when we got married. He wanted to get out of chemical engineering and work with people as a teacher. But he was not sure whether he would get a teaching position when coming back to this country.
So you moved back to this country with Kyle?
Yes, we came here together.
Settled near Buffalo?
Yes.
And who's this?
This is my sister on the right with her third child, Martin, and I'm on the left with Ralph, half a year old. This was my first trip with Ralph to Switzerland.
And who's this?
This is my brother Peter with Ralph, when Ralph was a year old, Christmas at our house.
And you said they were very close because
Yes.
they both...
Yes. Peter was never adopted, but he had great affinity for this child who had been adopted, and They loved each other very dearly. This is Ralph in his exuberance. Today he is 35 years old, and he's a salesman living in California.
And this is Kyle and Ralph?
Yes, both fast asleep.
What was it like, Toni, coming to America from Germany and Switzerland when you were a young woman, and then you were in a suburb of Buffalo, New York?
Of Buffalo, yes. Actually, when Kyle and I told my parents that we were going to get married and come to this country, both my parents had great apprehensions, not so much about losing me, but that they were wondering whether I would not feel homesick, because it had been my nature always to be homesick when we were in vacation or when I was staying with my godmother. I always wanted to be at home. Now I felt that I wanted to go to America. I had no feeling at all of attachment to staying in Europe. And it proved to hold. We moved around a bit in the beginning. First stayed in Cambridge for a while, and then moved to a country school, central school near Albany, and then to Niagara Falls. And in Niagara Falls, depending on the salary, which was always very low, we moved from a furnished basement apartment to an attic apartment, and then rented a house. And it was simply amazing to me that I never felt homesick for where I had been before. It was possible just to be okay wherever we lived. And I had wanted to go to America ever since the war years, where America was the country that would eventually liberate Germany and was on the move to free the Jewish people. This is how we felt about it. It had been sort of a glowing thing for me to come to this country, and probably played a part in my feeling when I met Kyle that we would get married. He seemed to be the right person to share the life with and to come to this country.
Did you feel in any way isolated in the suburbs of Buffalo, New York or anything, or did you have a lot of friends there, or?
We didn't have friends exactly where we lived, but we did meet people. I was quite active singing. I belonged to singing groups, and I went to the University of Buffalo. Certainly both of those things Kyle had encouraged me to. In Switzerland, he encouraged me to take voice lessons. He knew I loved to sing in the choir. He said, well, why don't you train your voice? And when we came to America, he said, why don't you go to college? And I did, and met a lot of people that way. And we always had friends who invited us and whom we invited. So it was a very social time for us. Of course, there were also his colleagues who we were friends with.
Has Kyle also encouraged you as a spiritual teacher or whatever, non-teacher, whatever?
Yes. He was always, this is the amazing thing, always right with whatever I was doing, and never gave me a hard time for staying away from home for a sesshin or for starting the center. He was very interested in that this work take place and that I participate in it.
Do you feel that you share this work with Kyle?
Yes, I do, particularly since we met up with the writings of Krishnamurti, which Kyle took to much more than the Zen training. Kyle was very much turned off by the ceremonies and rituals, but he very much liked reading Krishnamurti, and we went to hear him in this country and abroad, and shared this together. This is a picture of Kyle and me hiking in Switzerland, taking a rest after a climb. This is taken in the 80s in Denver, where Ralph lived.
Your son?
Yes, our son Ralph. This is also in Denver with our first grandchild, Benjamin. And this is Christmas in Denver with our granddaughter, Adrian. And this is a Christmas picture just taken last year in Colorado of the whole family.
Here we're going back in time to the 1970s.
Yes.
This is you at the Zen Center. Are you a teacher at this time, or what are you doing at this time?
No, this was in 1977, and Philip Kapleau had asked me to give 8 talks during his absence, and this picture was taken for the newsletter of the center after one of those what was called Dharma talks. I could.
This is you and Philip Kapleau?
Yes, we were talking together during a picnic, the annual Zen picnic.
Can you talk a little about your relationship with Philip Kapleau, your teacher?
It was a good relationship. There was we had good feelings about each other. I was sort of his first disciple, having a disciple ceremony, and I knew him from almost the very beginning, and he had confidence in me. He liked the fact that people in the Sangha, in the community, responded well to the talks I gave, and that I was a family person, and that there were a lot of family people in the Sangha who would probably appreciate having a family person as his successor. So he asked me quite early in our relationship whether someday when he retired I would take over the center.
And how did you feel about that when he asked you that?
Oh, terrible. That was not in my plans at all. I didn't know how to do this. I didn't want to do it, and I had a family myself, and it was a very hard thing to think about. But since as a student you take vows to do what your teacher asks you to, I agreed to do that. Because he said, well, there'll still at least be 5 years, so there's a lot of time. This is a talk given at a workshop. This is having tea and talking with the workshop participants in the garden. This is a celebration of Buddha's birthday. This is the picture that was usually taken after Sesshin. I led that one still at the Zen Center. I'm the gray-haired woman in the middle in the front row. In 1977, Philip Kapleau asked me to go to Poland. We had been there together in 1975, and so I went there and held a workshop in Sesshin with the Polish Sangha. This is a workshop.
You were the teacher?
Yes. And actually, the Poles had written to Philip Kapleau what they should call me, and up till then I wasn't called sensei, but he said, well, since you're going there and you're going to be teaching from now on, let everybody call you sensei, which is the Japanese word for teacher. This was the next year, 1978. I went back to Poland again to hold workshop and retreat, and this time the Polish people had gotten a country house together, and this was in fact the very first retreat, or Sesshin still called at that time, which I held in the country, and I was deeply impressed with the possibilities of sitting quietly in the country. This particular picture was taken during a long walk that we took afterwards through the lovely hills and blueberry fields. There we are, picking and eating blueberries. It was a wonderful time.
And are you still at the Zen Center teaching here?
No, this is after I left the Zen Center and we started our own center, calling it the Genesee Valley Zen Center, at a house in in Rochester. You see the robes and rakusus are gone.
When did you first get the idea for Springwater, for moving the Genesee Valley Zen Center out into the country, in other words? Was this already in the works at this time?
Oh yes. When leaving the Zen Center and letting people know that I would continue working with whoever wanted to work with me, it was in my mind that if we ever started a place, it would be in the country. But of course, at first we had to find a place for the very large local membership to attend sittings and come to workshops. And we rented a camp on Lake Canandaigua for our retreats. This was taken after retreat at Camp Onanda. This is also after retreat at Camp Onanda.
How about? Is that you over on the far right with the pink shirt on?
Yes, up the steps. This picture was taken in Germany, Haus der Stille, Roseburg, where I do retreats every year. This, of course, wasn't the first retreat. The first one was in 1975 with Philip Kaplow. This was taken during a talk given in Roseburg, Germany.
This looks like you at Springwater.
Yes, this is looking at the land, which was again a love at first sight. We had looked at many, many parcels of land and almost despaired of ever finding something that fit our budget and also made it possible to have septic fields for 40 or 50 people. And this land finally was found, and it was lovely to walk on and to look at.
Can you say something about you talked about the feeling you had for how important it would be to have retreats in a country setting? Can you talk some about why that is and
Well, for people to be in close touch again with land and sky and running water, this was something I felt would be wonderful if there was a stream that would go through the land. The sound of water is such a marvelous thing. And there were open fields and woods, and there were deer. So it seemed just so important for us to have this opportunity to experience the land and sky and woods and quietness together.
There you are at the Cascade, the wonderful running water
Yes.
with its beautiful sound. So here you are breaking ground. Is this putting in the driveway maybe?
Yes, there was no road that led through the land, so we had to fell trees and then have bulldozers come to make the road. This was in spring 1984.
And the people those of you who were your students at that time and you were all doing this together, this was a...
Well, I didn't consider people my students, but there were lots of very interested, enthusiastic staff members who felled these trees and helped building, helped with the building. It was almost all done by non-professionals, although a lot of people who were members had professional skills. What I meant is not hired work, except bulldozers and cement mixers.
And here you are at Springwater. What's going on here?
This was our annual meeting in 1986, at which we changed our name from Genesee Valley Zen Center to Springwater Center.
This is you casting your vote?
That's me casting a vote, yes.
And which did you vote for?
These are people in the sitting room listening to a talk that I gave about the proposed name change. Of course, the preparations had long been done for this. This is Kyle sitting on the deck after the name change. He looks happy enough. This was the picnic potluck after the annual meeting. Here I am in the Springwater kitchen cutting the cake for my 60th birthday. This is a picture of staff in summer of '89 with some children visiting Stu. These are his nephews. This was taken after a retreat, staff and retreat participants.
And that's you in the red shirt over on the right-hand side. And
that's right, and you right in front of me.
That's right, and Kyle is over there at the bottom on the left.
With his blue jacket.
Uh-huh. Well, this has been an amazing journey, Toni, through a life that began in Germany, went through the Nazi period in Germany and into Switzerland and to Buffalo, New York, and to the Rochester Zen Center, and traveling to many parts of the world like Poland, where you felt first the draw to be in the country doing retreats, and then finally the split with the Zen Center, and along the way your marriage and your child, and finally the creation of the Genesee Valley Zen Center and its turning into the Springwater Center and the building of the center. And here we are now at the Springwater. This is the pond here at the Springwater Center. And it's an amazing journey, and here you are in a place where the work that you do focuses so much on on questioning the way that we construct a picture story of our lives, of who we are, an image of ourselves, or many images of ourselves, and then are stuck in that. And at the same time, there's been something very real and tremendously powerful in looking at this life that has unfolded and that has somehow created or been a major part of creating this place and this work that's here now.
We'll end here for today.